Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive. We're back here with another edition of Budget Magic, and this week we're doing something I'm pretty excited about. One request we've gotten a ton over the last few weeks is to play some Budget Magic decks that are rotation proof. So this is an attempt to display a deck that is both budget and will still be legal once the format rotates in about a month. So I decided to start out our post-rotation exploration with Mardu Goggles, both because it's cheap and it also looks super sweet. Like I'm pretty, I'm pretty excited just to test out this deck. So it's $68 online, $95 in paper. So we only have 4 creatures in the deck. We have 3 Soulfire Grandmasters. So 1 and a white, you get a 2/2 with lifelink, gives all your instants and sorceries lifelink, and you can pay 2 and 2 red or blue, so 2 red blue color or hybrid mana, and you can give an instant or sorcery buyback basically. The next time you cast an instant or sorcery, it goes back to your hand instead of the graveyard. Also, 1 Monastery Mentor. This is sort of our finisher in the deck. Get it down in the late game, make a whole bunch of tokens, and eventually win. So that's all we have for creatures. So this is really a spell-based deck, and all the spells in the deck are chosen based around Pyromancer's Goggles. So Pyromancer Goggles is a legendary artifact, costs 5 mana. You can tap it to add 1 mana, and when you use that mana to cast an instant or sorcery spell, you get to copy that spell, and you choose new targets for the copy. So, Goggles makes us want to play a whole bunch of red instants and sorceries, and that's what the deck is. We have the main combo of the deck is 4 copies of Magmatic Insight. So 1 red, you discard a land and get to draw 2 cards, and 4 copies of Tormenting Voice, 1 and a red, you get to discard any card and you draw 2 cards. So these are just card filtering spells that you basically lose 2 cards from your hand, get 2 new cards off the top of your deck. But with Goggles in play, you don't pay the additional cost for the copy. So these become pay 2 cards from your hand, 1 the Tormenting Voice or Magmatic Insight, and whatever you discard, and then you draw 4 cards, so they turn into card advantage spells. And these in the early game help us cycle through our deck and find what we need, like the Goggles or removal spells. And then in the late game, they provide this overwhelming card advantage in conjunction with Pyromancer's Goggles. So those are kind of the engine cards. Then we have a bunch of cool removal-y spells. We have 1 Crater's Claw. So X in a red, and you deal X damage to target creature or player. Pretty hard for us to trigger the Ferocious ability, but still, we're a 27 land deck, so in the late game we can potentially burn an opponent out with double Crater's Claw. We have 4 Wild Slash. This is just early game removal, get rid of some early creatures from our opponents. And also, when you double it up with the Goggles, you can kill like an Anafenza or a Courser of Krufix. And you can also split those copies, so you can kill a little creature and send 2 damage at our opponent's face. We have 4 Commune with Lava. This card, not sure how good it is. It's interesting with Goggles. You can cast it as an instant. It's X and 2 red. You exile the top X cards of your library. Until your next turn, you can play those cards. So you get to play this on your opponent's end step, like a Sphinx's Revelation. You exile a whole bunch of cards, and then you have to play those on your next turn, or they remain in exile. So it's cool with Goggles, because sometimes you can exile like 15 or 20 cards. The downside is it puts you in this weird position where you often can't play everything that you want to that's exiled. So you end up, it's not pure 15 card draw, card advantage. It's more card selection. It's almost like a dig through time in red. Way worse, but that kind of idea. You get to play this, and then you pick out 2 or 3 of the best cards, use your mana on those, and cast them the next turn. And that's about how Commune works. 4 Crackling Doom. This is one of the centerpieces of the Mardu Goggles deck. It is red, a white, and a black. For an instant, does 2 damage to each opponent, and each opponent sacrifices their biggest creature, the creature with the greatest power. So you double this up with Goggles, and you're getting 4 damage, and making your opponent sack their 2 biggest creatures. Kolaghan's Command, not great, but it's kind of important just because It gets back our Monastery Mentor, which is our main way of finishing the game apart from burning our opponent out. Also can get back a Soulfire, so it's kind of a hedge in case those get killed. One thing to keep in mind with Goggles is when you cast Kolaghan's Command, you have to choose two modes. Return a creature from your graveyard to your hand, target player discards a card, destroy target artifact, or Kolaghan's Command deals 2 damage to creature or player. You don't get to choose those modes again when for the copy that comes off of Pyromancer's Goggles. So if you choose return a creature card to your hand and deal 2 damage, the copy is also going to be deal 2 damage. You can choose a different target and return a creature. You can choose a different creature, but you can't cast the first one for destroy an artifact and target player discards a card, and then on the copy choose return a creature and deal 2 damage. It just doesn't work that way. It's important because we also have our 3 copies of Mardu Charm, which is the same thing. You choose one, 4 damage to a creature, put 2 1/1 white warrior tokens on the battlefield, and they gain first strike until end of turn, or basically an instant speed duress. Your opponent reveals their hand, and you choose a non-creature, non-land card from it, and they discard it. A single copy of Seismic Rupture. We really just need some way to take care of little creatures. If Battle for Zendikar was in the format, this would be Radiant Flames. Talked about Pyromancer's Goggle. Oh yes, Mob Rule. Mob Rule, 6 mana, you choose one. Gain control of all creatures with power 4 or greater, or gain control of creatures 3 or less. This is basically just a finisher for our deck. It hasn't seen any play. Unfortunately, it doesn't work all that well with Goggles because you don't get to choose both modes. You can't choose 4 and greater and 3 or less with the same copy of Mob Rule. But since we don't have any creatures, this is just a way to do a bunch of burn to our opponent and then eventually steal most of their board or all of their board and win the game. So that is the main deck. Basically, like I said, Goggles, cast a bunch of instant sorceries, finish the game with our single Monastery Mentor, and Soulfire is basically there just for value. Giving our things lifelink, our instants and sorceries, helps us live longer, and it's just a powerful card in a late game. We can use the buyback ability. So that's the main deck. As far as the mana base, 4 Battlefield Forge, 3 Caves of Koilos, so 7 Pain lands. We have 4 Bloodfell Caves as game lands, 6 mountains, 3 plains, 1 swamp, 4 Nomad Outpost, and 2 Foundry of the Consul. This card's pretty sweet. This gives us 2 chump blockers in the late game, and technically we can do some damage with it too. It's a slow clock, but it is a clock. So it is a 27 land deck, but that's okay because we have Magmatic Insight and Tormenting Voice, which allow us to discard lands and turn them into new cards. And you need a lot of lands if you're playing Magmatic Insight. You can't play this in a 20 land deck or something. Sideboard, 2 copies of Erase to deal with enchantments permanently since it exiles. 2 copies of Roast to help us take down Siege Rhinos and Tassigers. 2 Silk Wraps to help us take care of annoying little creatures. Arc Lightning. This one's pretty sweet as far as Goggles, since you get to divide up 6 damage for only 3 mana. Another Seismic Rupture to come in against aggro decks. 3 Outpost Siege to create some card advantage and give us game against control decks. 2 End Hostilities, another hedge against aggro and midrange, and another copy of Mob Rule for decks for when we're against decks where it just literally is game over and our opponents can't beat it. So I started playing this deck, Mardu Goggles. It's really sweet and has some cool interactions, but as I was playing the deck, I kept thinking, I'm discarding all these cards, I'm filling my graveyard. Why am I not digging through time and casting Treasure Cruise? I just don't. This is driving me insane. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me that you'll want to be Magmatic Insight and Tormenting Voice and not being able to Treasure Cruise and dig through time. Plus, I had trouble finding our Goggles when we want it. Sometimes we draw through 25 or 30 cards of our library and not find a single copy of Goggles. Other times we'd have 3 in our hand, which is like a mold of 5. So I said, what if we took and changed this deck around, and instead of going, I said, what if we went to Jeskai Goggles instead? So, as a special treat for this budget magic, you're actually almost getting 2 budget magics, because we also have a couple matches of Jeskai Goggles. This is also a post-rotation deck. It is similar to the Mardu deck, but instead of black, we are splashing blue. Or actually, really, we are a blue-red based Goggles deck that is splashing white, in all honesty. So, let's break down the differences in this deck. We're not going to talk about every card because some of them are the same. The foundation of Goggles with Magmatic Insight and Tormenting Voice remains the same. So that's exactly the same as a Mardu build. The difference is we have more payoff cards for getting things in our graveyard. We have 4 copies of Dig Through Time and 1 copy of Treasure Cruise. So we have 5 big delve spells that can take advantage of all the cards we're discarding. We have a counter spell, a single Clash of Wills. I would have liked to make this our more controlling build in the main deck, but there's just not a lot of slots when you're playing Goggles, Magmatic Insight, and Tormenting Voice. Had to go down to 3 Wild Slash, so we still have that early interaction, but not quite as much. We have a single copy of Mind Swipe. Mind Swipe is a spell that I love. We did a whole budget magic build around it before. Unfortunately, I couldn't play more because it's not that great with Goggles. Like, unless somehow you're having a counter war and can count and copy Mind Swipe and choose 2 different spells, it is basically going to counter the same thing twice, and 1 copy will fizzle, so you don't even get the damage. 2 copies of Roast. We have 3 copies of Anger of the Gods. I should probably explain this real quick. So I didn't have Anger in the first deck, even though I wanted it, because I started recording this the end of last week. Then this weekend they spoiled Radiant Flames, which is basically a substitute for Anger of the Gods. Not exactly the same, but it's a 3 damage, 3 mana sweeper in red. So the Anger of Gods listed here, if we were playing the post-rotation version, are just straight up swaps for Radiant Flames. Should be about the same price, shouldn't really affect how the deck plays too much. There's some like fringe changes, but really it's close enough that I felt comfortable playing Anger of the Gods here, even though it will rotate, just because we have Radiant Flames as a straight replacement. The white is for 4 copies of Jeskai Charm, so this gives us more burn reach, even more so than Mardu Charm, since we can deal 8 damage with Goggles by throwing it at our opponent's face. And also, in some matchups, putting 2 creatures on top of our opponent's library is just a huge play that wrecks our opponent's next 2 draw steps for only 3 mana. So Master of the Way, card I'm super excited about. 3 a blue and a red, you draw a card, and Master of the Way deals damage equal to target creature or player equal to the number of cards in your hand. So since we draw so many cards and often have a full hand, doubling this up with Pyromancer's Goggles is often 15, 19 damage, which is just super sweet, and this is how we close out a lot of games. We also have a Pearl Lake Ancient as another finisher, but so Burning or Pearl Lake Ancient are really the way this deck wins. And the last main deck card we have is a single copy of Howl of the Horde. Howl of the Horde might not be optimal in this deck, but it is super sweet. The reason I'm playing Howl of the Horde is because it lets us triple up on our digs and treasure cruises. So we cast Howl with Goggles, get 2 copies of Howl, which says, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You choose new targets for the copied spell. So we have 2 Howls, which means we copy the next 2 spells we play, thanks to Pyromancer's Goggles. Then we cast a Treasure Cruise or Dig Through Time, and we get to Dig Through Time or Treasure Cruise 3 times, which is just absolutely absurd. So this is the Jeskai version of the deck. As far as the mana base, we got 4 Battlefield Forge, 4 Shivan Reefs, 5 Mountains, 3 Islands, 4 Swiftwater Cliffs, 3 Tranquil Groves, and 3 Windscarred Crags. It seems like it works out pretty well. One reason there's a lot of white in the deck, even though we have very few actual white cards, is the Radiant Flames thing. Radiant Flames, unlike Anger, it basically has like a domain for the amount of the colors of mana you cast it for. So to do 3 damage with Radiant Flames, you need to tap 3 different colors of mana. So we want to have access to white for Radiant Flames, even though we only have Jeskai Charm in the deck at the moment. Sideboard, we got the Missing Wild Slash for aggro decks, 3 copies of Deflecting Palm, which seems like a pretty sweet way with Goggles, you can pay 2 mana, double Deflecting Palm, prevent damage from like 2 Siege Rhinos, and deal 8 to an opponent. Just seems absurd. 2 Disdainful Strokes to come in against Abzan and in control matchups. Another Mind Swipe, also for control matchups. Negate, same thing, control matchups to deal with Planeswalkers and win a counter war. Anger of the Gods, third one, can bring it in when we are playing an aggro deck, black-green elves, any of those little creature go wide strategies, mono-red aggro. Again, these would be Radiant Flames in the post-rotation build. Mob Rule, a couple of those just because I really think it could be sweet in the right matchups. And a single Volcanic Vision, 7 mana, return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Volcanic Visions deals damage equal to the card's converted mana cost to each creature your opponent controls. Exile Volcanic Visions. So, with Dig Through Time, we can potentially double up our Volcanic Visions with Pyromancer's Goggles, get back 2 copies of Dig Through Time from our graveyard, deal 16 damage to all of our opponent's creatures, which would even kill like Eldrazi or any big things that are floating around in the format, and then have 2 Dig Through Times in hand. So it comes in slower, grindy matchups, and even just at like 5 mana with Master of the Way or something, it's a way that in not doubling it up, it can kill a Siege Rhino or a Tassiger, a whole board full of them. So kind of cool to test it out. It's really expensive, so I don't think it's like a standard staple or anything, but it is pretty sweet. So anyway, 2 for the price of 1 this week on Budget Magic. You will see we have 3 matches of the Mardu build, then 2 matches of the Jeskai build. I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, keep this in mind as you're building for post-rotation. I'm not sure this can be a tier 1 top of the format deck, but it's really fun to play, and I think it can be competitive, as you'll see in the matchups. While the overall record of the deck wasn't super great, I think the Jeskai build is better. Like, I had more success with that build. It is competitive, and in some of the games we lost, I felt like we were close to turning the corner, but we just didn't quite get there. So anyway, enjoy the videos, and I will see you guys next week.